We will start the second morning session with Jonas Lechert from Tunen Institute of Sea Fisheries. And the talk will be entitled Scenarios of Spatial Fishing Closures Indicate Lower but More Concentrated Fishing Effort for Southern North Sea. Jonas, 10 minutes.
Thank you. So I'm from the Thun Institute in Germany, and I will not read the title again and jump right into it then. Here you see the title again. So as you all know, fisheries is taking place in a social ecological system, and naturally it's influenced by many environmental, economic, but also social factors. It's also taking place in a spatial system, as we've heard in all your talks today, especially in the North Sea. Offshore wind farm expansion is taking more and more space from fishing grounds, but also marine protected areas are being progressively designed and implemented. Fishing area decreases. So what I present here today is part of the work I did for Seawise Work Package 5, where I used the agent-based model to test for the effects of these spatial fishing closures. The study area is the southern North Sea, where most of the fisheries takes place with these nice, colorful, relatively small vessels. They use bottom otter trawl and beam trawls and catch benthic and demersal species such as plaice, sole, common shrimp, and Norway lobster. The agent-based model I used is called FishCode, standing for Fishery Simulation with Human Complex Decision-Making. Here you can see the study area. It's focusing on the main German fleets in the area, and it has a daily time step and a spatial resolution of roughly 5.5 kilometers. And it's integrating lots of different data, starting with fishery-dependent data, such as logbooks and vessel positions, environmental data, economic data, such as fuel prices and market prices, and then also spatial features, such as landing ports and the fishing closures. All this data was used to derive input parameters. It's used to model landings during the simulation. So there is no biological submodel, but landings are simulated using lookup tables that are based on logbook data. And also historical data was used to calibrate the model and validate it. The emphasis of FishCode lies on decision-making of the agents or skippers of the vessels. And in every time step, agents answer 3 central questions. That is what to fish, how long to fish, and whether to go fishing at all. And around these infographics, you can see all the factors that influence these decisions. And apart from the more usual factors that influence the decisions that are integrated in many fisheries models, FishCode also uses a bunch of more conceptual factors, such as habits, the actions of the social networks, so what the colleagues earn and where they go, and planning and security. And these are then used in a framework called Consumat approach to determine what they fish. And with that, I mean a combination of target species and gear. And I will not go into more detail of FishCode here, but I'm happy to talk about it in the coffee break or welcome you to check out these publications. Coming to the analysis and the scenarios. So I used the one wind farm scenario. In the baseline scenario, it was the wind farm status of 2023. And then there was one future scenario with the expansion, how it will likely look like in 2040, which you can see here, the future OWF scenario. And then there are 4 no-take zone scenarios that all stem from work that has been developed within Seawise. So one that's called potential MPA scenario, where we close all designated MPA areas, such as Natura 2000 areas, where no fishing restrictions are enforced yet. One benthic scenarios where 30% of the areas with the highest relative benthic status is closed, and one bycatch scenarios where areas are closed that overlap with strong occurrences of endangered species. Then there are also combinations of the 3 no-take zone scenarios with the future offshore wind farm scenario. I ran 25 simulations for all these scenarios. and compared all these to the baseline scenarios to assess the effects. If we look at the effort, so in this graph here, you can see the relative change in fishing efforts for the scenarios that are color-coded and the three main fleets, which are the otter bottom trawls, the place and sole fishery, and the common shrimp fishery. We can see that effort is going down for the otter board fishery, it's going up for the place and sole fishery, and it's going down for the shrimp fishery with very strongly in especially two scenarios, which are the the potential MPA scenarios here in blue. If we look at profits, the picture is similar for otterboard and common shrimp scenarios, but it's a little bit more varied for the place and sole fishery. And I will now explain a little bit more in detail the results that the otterboard fleets MPAs had a strong negative effect of up to 25% loss of profits, which was mostly due to reduced place landings. They did adapt and target more nephrops, which is a higher value species, but that couldn't compensate the losses. And then there were also the fleet that was mostly affected by offshore wind farms with a loss of 6% in profits. Then the place and sole fleet had an effort increases, but then profits only slightly decreased in two scenarios, like very weakly. And the general loss in profits here was mostly due to lower landings of place that was most strongly in the benthic scenario, and also lower landings of sole in the future offshore wind farm potential MPA scenario. Then the shrimp fleet had these very strong losses in the potential MPA scenarios, and that was because the MPAs overlap heavily with coastal catch grounds of this fleet. And in response, the fleet had to go further offshore, which increased the steaming time, reduced fishing time, and also increased fuel costs. Looking at some spatial results, here again, the 7 scenarios are compared to the baseline, and you see the relative change in fishing effort. And the red areas, same as in Logan's presentation, the red areas represent a relative increase of fishing effort, the blue areas a relative decrease, and the strong blue areas mostly represent the closed fishing areas. What is a very general result is that fishing effort generally increased in the areas that were still open. And I want to point your attention to some very strong increases that happened in the potential MPA scenarios, and that was due to displacement of the shrimp fleet. Then also this effect was stronger the larger the area was of the closed of the fishing restriction, and the future offshore wind farm benthic scenario had the largest closed area, and here 25% of all fishable cells had at least a 50% increase in fishing effort. Coming to the conclusions, all fleets struggled to adapt, so they all experienced losses, even though they had some adaptation they could do. Then the otterboard and shrimp fleet had the strongest losses, so they were most vulnerable, especially in the designated MPA scenarios. In comparison to no-take zones, offshore wind farms had relatively small effects. And also, as a take-home message, maybe these closing scenarios, these spatial fishing closures should be accompanied by other fisheries management to protect ecosystems because of the more concentrated fishing effort and fishing pressures on these ecosystems. Of course, there's more work to do. So the spatial scenarios here are very isolated. There are no climate change or economic scenarios that could change the pictures. And also, Fish Codes has an emphasis on the decision-making submodel, and the combination with a more sophisticated ecological model would be very interesting to investigate these feedback loops between ecology and economy. And with that, I'm done, and in a bit, I'm happy to take your questions. Yeah, references.
Thank you, Jonas. We will proceed with Olivier Lepap from Infremer. A win-win-win, 3 wins for fish and fisheries, restoration of habitats key to improving stocks, catches, and marine ecosystems.
Okay, thank you. I will talk about fish and fisheries, but not about fisheries nor climate impact. Nobody stand up and leave? Okay, so I can go on. Thank you. Yes, I will deal about restoration, degradation and restoration of habitats to improve stock catch on marine ecosystems. Few general ideas before starting. This evidence for everybody, no stock recruitment. I just take few examples randomized from the ransom miles database, which is just evidencing the lack of link. And this is very old pictures about the stock recruitment that just evidence the fact that if you made exception of the highly overexploited fish stocks, you've got recruitment drop before a drop in biomass, so recruitment drives stock strength, okay? This is why we're interested in stock recruitment for information today, for instance. The second general idea is that there is a huge level of dependency to estuaries and coast of many exploited species. In a high seas working group, which is called Value of Habitats for Exploited Species, we investigate that for almost 15 years. The group was held last week for this year in Hamburg. And the group evidenced that for the ICS fish stocks, you've got a little bit more or less than half of the species and 3/4 of the landings which rely on species which has at least one of the life stages that relies on estuaries and coasts. On these stages is mainly the juvenile stage, which is the case for 1/3 of species on 2/3 landings. And this result from the ICIS group are also evidence elsewhere from the US, from the Gulf of Mexico, and also worldwide. So it's more general. Okay. Last general idea, the impact, local impact in the nursery habitats of anthropogenic pressures at habitat scale on juvenile fish. It can be the impact of habitat loss, pollution, eutrophication, invasive species. And in the same group, a work that was head by Hilliot a few years ago, we evidenced that for more than 90% of the fish species investigated by ICIS, you've got at least one pressure is evidence on at least one stages, mainly at juvenile stage. And for 3/4 of the species, you can evidence the impact of more than one pressure. So, okay, we know what's happened in local habitats where juvenile concentrated in estuaries and coast. You've got impacts of anthropogenic pressure. But the remaining question is what's happened for recruitment on spawning biomass at population scale. So what about the impacts of juvenile habitat disturbances at population management units for fish biomass productions on fisheries? This is what now it's called the offset ecological impacts, local pressure with local impacts, but consequences at dramatically wider scales. To try to investigate it, we developed during COAS a generic life cycle model. We looped the life cycle of the species and we focused on stock recruitment relation. As far as you've got in the lower left, the recruitment, it's not possible to adjust a stock recruitment relation for a given stock. And we just transferred the formulation of the Beaverton whole stock recruitment in a similar way, but formulated with two different parameters. The steepness, which is the level of, it's the shape of the curves. It's the level of decrease of the recruitment when the spawning biomass is decreased by a factor 5. And after you've got a carrying capacity, it's almost similar, totally similar to the Beverton stock recruitment equations, but formulated in a different way. And the interest of that is that the steepness is adimensional, and there are plenty of studies that investigate it for different stock, different studies from huge databases like the Myers one. So you've got species-specific estimates from really huge database of these parameters. After the carrying capacity could be estimated as a stock-specific parameters. So we use this formulation and we apply this model to case study in the Eastern English Channel, so called the Southern North Sea, perhaps for seawise, for 4 species. Okay, we've got this life cycle model. We want to focus on consequences of anthropogenic pressure on coastal habitats. We use 4 species, the whiting, the plaice, the common sole, the sea bass. We know the concentration, the level of concentration of these species on these shallow coastal and estuarine areas. We have also investigated the consequences of pollution on the lower density of juvenile fish in polluted coastal and estuarine area regarding Safe One. This has been investigated by huge database from the Water Framework Directive. And we also know from HIMODNet the level of nursery habitat loss from the latest 90th century. So you've got just an illustration here in the lower left corner for the same estuaries, but we've got this data for almost everywhere in the Eastern Channel. So the interest of this model is that we're able to infer the consequence of habitat degradation, lower density, higher mortality on the steepness on the carrying capacity. So this is the interest of this, the second interest of this model. So this is what we have done. And of course, this is a very classical stock assessment outputs. The black lines in the bottom is the present situation for a sea bass, from the duration from fish mortality to catches. And the other ones are the same, but if you restore just their very local nursery habitats. If you do so, sorry. Oh, okay. Yes, it's not okay. I understand what's happened. No problem. If you do so, you increase you a little bit change the level of fishing mortality at MSY, but you especially increase the potential catch, and you also increase the spawning biomass at MSY by a factor more than 50% just by restoration of local nursery for sea bass. If you try to enlarge the situation for the species, whiting, plaice, sole, and sea bass, it's different regarding the species, their level of dependency to shallow areas on their life cycle. But you've got different gains in tons at maximum sustainable yields, and different gains in percentage also of sustainable biomass. So you increase sustainable biomass, you increase catch potentials. Here, evidence at MSY, but it's also the case for others. You increase resiliency, lower risk of collapse, and it's also valuable for other species for which it was not estimated. We also applied this model to other case studies, like, for instance, the Irish sea sole. You've got this very recent investigation regarding the habitat, the shallow habitat lost in the Irish Sea from Stump. So we applied the model also and calculated the loss of spawning biomass and catches regarding the surface loss of nursery habitats for the common sole. This is almost an offer. I think now the model is okay and can be applied to plenty of other case studies if you are interested in. So the take-home message, fish recruitment is the driver of population production future biomass. No new information from nobody. It depends for a large number of species on coastal and estuarine habitats, which are impacted by coastal and anthropogenic pressures. So this is the double winner experience of habitat restoration. Locally, you increase biodiversity, you restore habitats, and at the wide scale, you improve offset ecological ecosystem services, including fish population and fisheries. Thank you.
Thank you, Olivier. Our next speaker will be François Bastardi from DTU Aqua, anticipated how spatial fishing restriction in EU waters perform to protect marine species, habitats, and dependent fisheries.
Yes, thank you. So this work is actually built on some of the presentations we have seen by previous speakers. So it's the starting point was to assess to which extent the existing MPA designation in the European waters are actually achieving the goal of protecting not only fish, but also other ecosystem components. So this is why we started from testing this. So those different ecosystem components are fish stocks, benthos, and the bycatch of protected or endangered species. And then on top of this, what would be the effect of climate change? And a second step in this project was very much to come up with some new suggestions for spatial restriction that would be more fit for purpose to achieve those goal of minimizing the fishing impacts on those ecosystem components. So various methods have been deployed to delineate those potential areas, mainly providing some risk map. And what we have done is then mobilize a suite of different modeling platform so that to test if we start reallocating the effort in reaction to the implementation of those areas. I forgot to mention that in red, they are the ones that are already excluding bottom trawling, while all the others are deemed vulnerable to bottom trawling, but still no plan has been implemented there. So if we test with that bunch of modeling platform from displays to osmos to the ecosystem model that is Ecospace, all having the spatial component explicit, and in the MED, the bend tool, the Ecospace, and again the displays, and yes, I'm not forgetting anybody. We mobilize those suite of models to get that kind of overarching results, looking at the row of different indicators from the total effort to the fuel cost, the gross value added as a proxy for the social benefit, and the spawning stock biomass and the total catches. What would be the effect of those existing MPAs compared to fit-for-purpose proposals? And we immediately see that, well, maybe the second one is better. If we look at the different case studies, different ecoregion across those different models and different indicators, we see that the existing network is not that efficient to achieve the goal of minimizing, as the CFP is requiring, the bycatch or the seafloor, or not affecting the seafloor integrity. While the fit for purpose hopefully are helping more in this. But we see that is not enough to implement those spatial closure or spatial restriction to certain fishing techniques. You also need to accompany this kind of management with an effort reduction. So it's again, it's about fishing less but fish better. So I will not enter into details, but just recalling those previous platforms we have seen presented by other speakers. So here in the Eastern Ionian Sea, what was tracking is that actually there is no a big effect of the existing proposal, but the fit-for-purpose proposal are actually giving counterproductive outcomes in the sense that they are actually augmenting, increasing the risk for bycatching those unwished component. Well, they are wished, but those generating those unwished catches. So that was one of the main outcome of this case study. Another one was looking at the cascading effect using the Ecospace ecosystem modeling and what could be gained implementing those closures in terms of here we have a big gain in apex fish predators. And in the North Sea findings, Logan has presented this graphics that is showing that actually we have some benefit, but we can have some counterproductive effect on the endangered species, increasing the bycatching, and is getting even worse when the climate change is also affecting and making irrelevant our spatial protection. And then I think I have last one is not functioning. Can we see? Yes, with some delay. So in the Bay of Biscay, we can see winners and losers. I guess it has been presented yesterday as well. So some lesson learned is very much about saying that we are aiming at designing an effective area closure. That means that protects the juvenile part of the stock. At the meantime, having this reduction in unwanted catches, and at the meantime, safeguarding the habitat that is supportive to those fishing opportunities. And this means that you could try to improve your gear selectivity on locally, but you could also play by improving the implementing spatial restriction as an improvement of the spatial selectivity. We have seen that the challenges are, of course, you induce short-term socioeconomic cost. Implementing those areas is mainly induced by decreasing catch opportunity. You also affecting the fuel consumption, and you are potentially displacing, in some cases, the effort toward other component of the ecosystem, which is not a positive outcome. But we also need to think about this trade-off in time, that on the longer term, we can actually have some benefits coming from the closures and the spillover effect on the enhancing the biomass. And who will benefit is another issue, but at least the fishing sector as a whole is a net beneficiary of that, unless the climate change is overruling everything and on the longer term. Spatial restriction are effective or relevant, as we have seen, is a good tool, but it's certainly not sufficient, because you need to associate this with other type of management, especially strong effort reduction in some cases, or moderate one, to avoid the effort displacement effect that fishermen will continue fishing and will even increase their pressure so that to break even and get the net profit they had before. And so we were advocating a bit for more ambitious actions from some member states to propose joint recommendation in this AFP Article 11, so that to adapt case by case to the needs. And we remember that climate change is actually the biggest issue behind the scene. I wanted to summarize a bit some lessons learned alongside this exercise we had in Seawise. One of them was actually we don't observe or anticipate a big effect of the existing MPR network. It's mainly because they might have been designing so that is consensus that was not affecting really the existing fishing activities on other sectors, and then low quality habitat have been protected first. And then the second one is that we see that some of those habitats are already adapted a long time ago, and then an extra pressure will not change the picture. And we see, we have seen some good examples that the spatial connectivity is something that you should not neglect in designing your MPAs, because of course, to cycle the life cycle, those species need to visit different habitats. And then we have seen as well that displacing the effort is actually creating an issue for scientists to capture the effect of the spatial restriction, especially because you don't have anymore a control point to compare with and is creating that kind of issue. And my last slide is about 4 extra lesson learned. Is increasing the effort, as we've seen right now, is also masking the degraded ocean productivity. So we should make sure that that kind of proxy is not used to tell that the ocean productivity is increasing. And we have an attraction effect when you start closing because of the spillover effect. We know all these effects that is fishing the line. And then we should not assume, as was a big lesson, that spatial management is alone sufficient. You need effort reduction as well, and reward later on. And the last one is also, there is a lot of criticism from the fishing sector saying that, well, the social equity is at stake when implementing those MPAs, but especially for affecting the small-scale sectors, but actually small-scale sectors are conducting passive gear fisheries, which is often still allowed in those areas. So there's kind of a lobbying effort that is claiming something that is misleading somehow. Thank you. Sorry for overshooting.
Thank you, Francois. And we're moving to the last speaker for this morning, Elliot Brown from the EU Aqua, MPAs as tools in European EBFM, existing compatibility, objective misalignment, and potential for future fisheries objectives.
Cool. Thank you for the invite. And I'm happy to be here to talk to you today about some work that's outside of Seawise that was done very much in collaboration with work from within Seawise. And we're going to change gears a little bit. And I'm not going to be talking about big, large, complex models. I'm going to be looking backwards at what we have seen and knowledge we do already have. So why are MPAs considered as EBFM tools? We had a good introduction to this from Katja on Monday. Pretty much, if we look into European legislation that's been adopted nationally, we can see kind of 2 main driving reasons why we use MPAs. One, and you can see bolded here, is for the reduction of fisheries impacts, so protecting endangered species or their habitats linked to environmental law, such as the Marine Strategy Framework Directive or especially the Habitats Directive. Another motivation, though, is also explicitly spelled out in the Common Fisheries Policy, and that is to aid in the management of the resources that we exploit themselves. And so there are these 2 kind of methods or motivations for using MPAs in EBFM. And so to talk about those today, I'm going to address 3 questions. The first 2 come from one project where you can find more details here, and you can get this at the end of the presentation as well, commonly known as Mapperfish. And the third question comes from a sister project that ran slightly in parallel called Spillover. And these 2 were funded through SINEA with a special request from DG Mare, but they both very much happened in parallel to Seawise and utilized some of their work. So we're going to go through each of these questions individually. So the first one being, how do MPAs currently interact with fisheries? So my colleagues in the Mapperfish project put together a big database of all the MPAs around Europe, not just relying on Natura 2000 areas, but also national databases and local experts adding to the database as well. And we utilized those polygons, those spatial data, to put together a specific data call that went out to all member states, as well as the UK and Norway. And we asked for 2 things. We asked for all of the fishing effort, landings, and value by C-square that we then superimposed with those MPA polygons. But we also gave them a specific code to be able to do this with their higher resolution data so that we weren't relying on the aggregations twice at C-square and MPA level. So we got this data at the MPA level as well, and we added buffers around as a sort of control. And so some results from that, we saw that we had varying rates of fishing within the MPAs across different ecoregions. And in some cases, for example, in the Baltic, where we have relatively low rates, it might be due to the fact that our data are limited to the VMS data. So small-scale fishers, smaller boats operating in coastal areas where there may be a higher density of MPAs, for example, in Sweden, may be underrepresented in this data set. However, we did find that 64% of MPAs were not fished. And of those that were not fished, 70% of them had no fishing in the surrounding areas. So we're not seeing this attraction effect. So that means that fewer than 20% of MPAs had edge fishing when fisheries were excluded from them. Of those that were fished, we saw lower rates of fishing in the MPA overall, but that changed when we look at the North Sea, where it's a bit more equivalent. So the red line you see through this figure just shows kind of the point at which the fishing effort inside and outside the MPA was equivalent. And so you see predominantly we're below, but in the North Sea, we're at about the same level. So that's kind of a quick overview of what's happening in the MPAs in terms of fisheries up till now. So if we go to our second stated question, how do the objectives of the MPAs align with these fishing activities that do occur within them? So again, we used the database put together by our colleagues, and they also collected information, not just about where they were in space, but the objectives of the MPA themselves, why they were initiated. They also collected information on what fishing activities were likely to occur and or were allowed to occur in the MPAs. And of course, we had our data collection as well to supplement that. So here we know what the objectives of the MPA were, and we know what kind of fishing activities were happening, how commensurable, how do these fit together? Well, this is where the work from Seawise comes in. So we relied on one of the Seawise systematic reviews looking at the effects of fishing on different ecosystem components. And in this review, data was collected on the types of impacts that different gear types imposed on different ecosystem components. And so we utilized that to calculate what we call an impact score. So this is essentially a representation of how much agreement or how much knowledge there is in the existing literature about individual impacts. And what we do here is we use essentially an inverse Shannon entropy index, which is a fancy way. I won't show any of the formulas. And it's mediated by the quality of the evidence that went into that calculation in 3 different dimensions, spatiotemporal and methodological ways. And so what we end up with is this matrix of scores by gear and by ecosystem component. And you can see we ended up with some positive ones, which was a bit strange, but that's explained in the report if you want to have a look. But essentially, how do we use this in the MPAs themselves? So we know what fishing was occurring and we know why they were put in place. So we just do essentially a sum up of these. So let's take an example MPA, which was established to protect some gravel areas, so some physical habitat. We're looking at this row and say there were some fisheries regulations put in place that didn't allow any bottom contacting gears. So we only had pelagic gears operating. Well, then we would sum up those scores and we would get an incompatibility score of 0. So, hey, fishing in this gear, in this MPA, okay, it seems okay. Conversely, in the same MPA, if there were no regulations and we saw fishing with lots of different gears, well, we add up all of those cells. And in this circumstance, we would end up with a negative score. So we did this both for the fishing that we observed from our data call, but we also looked at where we had a lot of zeros up here. And we had a lot of zeros in our observations, but we had non-zero values when we relied on the stated fishing stuff from the management plans. And so we thought, okay, we know we have gaps, but they probably know what they're talking about when they're talking specifically about their own MPAs. So we adopted them. So essentially all of these zeros up here come down to the line. And so what does that mean overall for all of European MPAs? We see a big peak of a lot of no conflict at the 0 score, but we also see a lot of incompatibility across all of these negative scores. And this is in spite of our matrix being imperfect, not having all of the knowledge available. So just knowing the impacts that we do know occur, this is the type of incompatibility we see currently today in the way the MPAs are established. So quickly on to our third question, can MPAs contribute to fisheries rather than just try to be conservation tools? And in this one, I cheat a little bit. I'm equivocating spillover with support of fisheries. So we're going to look at spillover. So here we did an independent systematic review, and we were able to find 45 articles from a global review that actually tried to investigate spillover from MPAs. They provided us with 127 cases. Excuse me. And when we look at the individual characteristics of MPAs, we don't really see much difference between whether the study found spillover or not. And we looked at multiple ones of those, like age and area and where the MPA was relative to land. And again, no real big differences. But if we combine all of those characteristics together and do some factorial dimension reduction, we start to see patterns of combinations of these characteristics which do explain whether spillover was observed or not. And these were the characteristics that we found were most likely to be combined to separate out spillover from non-spillover observations. And so we took those and we used them in logistic regression, with our response being spillover or no spillover, and we reduced the model down to 3 key important ones. And we did some cross-validation there to make sure, and I was really surprised by our levels of success. It was very, very high, and I have some thoughts on why that might be. You can ask me later. But I was happy to be able to report that after checking it many times. And essentially these 3 factors here, age, position relative to land, so estuarine, coastal, island, offshore, and if it's part of a network, seem to be very good predictors of whether we're going to see spillover or not. Similarly, spillover occurs not just in an MPA, but with a species. So we also looked at species characteristics, and the short story of that is fewer data, many, many more characteristics, and models that do not converge yet. But there are still some indications that are intuitive, like whether an individual is sedentary or mobile, or whether it broadcasts spawns or broods. So finally, we go back to our initial questions, and these are the projects you can look up again. 2/3 of MPAs remain unfished, but we have some data gaps. One thing I'd like to point out is that while we didn't use big fancy models to try and do predictions and looking forward into the future, we were able to find that existing knowledge, we can identify knowledge that is generalizable and can be utilized in implementing future MPAs based on this foundational knowledge rather than data-driven ways. And similarly for the spillover stuff, we do need more observations, and spillover doesn't always equal the support of fisheries. So in this report, my colleagues put together a really good cookbook on if you want to be able to try and detect spillover from MPAs, how you should go about it and the methods you should use. And I would strongly encourage all of our institutes to try and get more evidence of this phenomenon, if it works. And if it does, how does it infect populations and fisheries? Thank you.